Well, thank you all for coming. So we are using the occasion of Sebastian having put out this really interesting book. It's quite a heavy brick of a book, but incredibly interesting, China's political system, to look at a topic which doesn't often get as much attention as I think it ought to. And that is the question of what is the relationship of not just America to China, but Europe to China, and Europe and America to China. After all, these are our fellow liberal democratic countries, and we have a lot in common. And indeed, in our effort to find some new angle of repose with China as it grows and is much more forward in its posture in the world, we do have something, in my view, of a clash of not ideology so much as political systems and values. And that manifests itself in many different ways. At the same time, we have this tremendous sort of, Sun Yat-sen once called China a dish of loose sand. But I would say more and more Europe is looking like a dish of loose sand. And indeed, Europe's relationship to the United States might be thus described. So we have a kind of an odd situation where we share an awful lot with the countries of Europe. And yet in certain ways, as each of us has had our own sort of political travails, we've drifted farther and farther apart. And China is playing an ever more catalytic role, both in the economic futures of Europe and America, but also, curiously, in our political futures. And I think even in how we do and possibly can relate to each other. So that is really our topic. And we've got a wonderful group here. It's interesting that, Sebastian, you ended your book, Implications for International Interactions with China. In other words, he's taken 424 pages of sort of exegesis on China, and he's ended to say, what are the implications for all of us around the world? So perhaps we're going to have a few short, let's try to keep ourselves to 5 minutes each to just sort of reflect on how we see this sort of changing kaleidoscope from our own countries. And we'll start with you, Sebastian.
Thank you, Orville, for the invitation. It's great to be here this evening. There are strange things happening. I just want to give some impressions from the machinery room of foreign policy in Germany also, to a certain extent. People, especially in business, are preparing for a shockwave from the Trump administration presently. They hope to avoid it. It won't happen, won't materialize. But at the same time, there should be some option in the room. So people are thinking, what do we do if sanctions, if the trade wars or minor trade conflicts, if they become reality, what are we doing? What kind of an option do we have? At the same time, and this makes things tricky, and that's what we are talking about tonight, I think, the Chinese are very active in courting potential partners for defending the multilateral trade system. So they are very active in individual European countries, but also in the European Union, in Brussels, to kind of present China as the alternative, as the guarantor of the international multilateral trading system. And you probably have heard about this speech of Xi Jinping, China's president, in Davos, in Switzerland, World Economic Forum, where he actually took actually promised an active leadership role for making multilateral institutions and the trade system work still. So China as the guarantor. So what the impression is among many people now is America, to the Trump administration, has become extremely unreliable. We can't rely on them. This is really an open debate now. What do we do with that? So China is probably not loved by most people, but seen as at least reliable in trade relations. Not open-minded, not really promising a liberalization of its economy, but still reliable in what it does and in the short term, at least. So this is something that is having a certain dynamism presently. And you probably have read about the G20 meeting in Baden-Baden, the meeting of finance ministers. And there it was out in the open, actually, that the US position was rather isolated in many ways. So seen as taken as distancing themselves from the traditional multilateral institutions, distancing themselves from the WTO continuity that was promised in the G20 declarations of the past. And so many countries that were kind of different in their positionings in the G20 in the past, they came together. And then Japan suddenly had similar positions as China. And Germany and China, even that was, we probably saw that also. I was surprised by that myself, that Xi Jinping made a phone call to Angela Merkel before Angela Merkel came to the US, actually. They were talking about defending or saving the multilateral trade system. This was the issue of that telephone call. And she had kind of, I don't know whether she brought the message here to Washington. So what we see, and this is really surprising in the speed which is happening, realignments taking place, kind of rethinking, at least on the business side. Foreign policymakers are much less inclined to shift positions so quickly. But in business, people are really thinking hard whether China might offer the better option, short-term or mid-term, to collaborate with. So this is something that I find frightening. We will discuss that with the evaluation, but just the phenomenon itself is really something that comes as a surprise. So what I see, I want to be provocative. I think that makes things move forward, probably. If the Trump administration says America first, it might happen next time in the G20 in July in Hamburg, that America is alone in the G20 with its positions. That's a serious issue now, really. It's was out in the open in Baden-Baden this week.
In the sort of process of unraveling, I think, Peter, your country, Great Britain, sort of took the lead with Brexit. So how are you all looking at China's rise and what's just happened in this country?
Well, I mean, I think, first of all, Orville, for my country, China has always been as much an opportunity as a threat. And I think that remains true today. If you look at public opinion surveys across Europe and you look at attitudes towards China, I think in all countries you see positivity towards China going down a little. I'm going to look across at Sebastian because he'll be looking at these more recently than I have, so I stand to be corrected. But I think you see in all of them public opinion towards China going down a little bit. But I think you see a high level of positivity, and in the UK that level is relatively high. So what you don't see is the kind of conversation that you have in this country with a lot of people, including the people who voted for Brexit, seeing China as a threat to their jobs. That is not the same in the UK. I think the second thing I'd say is that for us, we have made a big decision about our future in Europe. One thing that my government says very, very clearly is that we remain Europeans, we remain a European country, even though we are choosing to leave the EU. And we will continue to want to cooperate very closely with countries with whom we share very strong values and interests, and China will be one of the issues on which we will want to continue to talk to our European allies and partners. That is not going to change for us. Now, how you feel about that, Sebastian, how you feel about that, I'll let you say, but from our point of view, that is a conversation that we continue to pursue and, if anything, to deepen. Where I sit at the moment is in the United Nations, so I'm working with China every day in the Security Council. And what I see is a country that is keen to use some of the opportunities that are presented by the fragmentation, the global fragmentation that you talk about, Orville, but that is not quite yet ready to go the whole hog. And I think that's a question we might want to explore today, is how far is China really willing to go? There is definitely an opportunity for us if China is saying we want the established international system, global system to work. And I think China has said that very clearly in regards to the UN. I think it hasn't said it quite so clearly on some other international institutions, but for the UN it has. And so when Xi Jinping came to China 2 years ago, he made two very big statements. One, China was going to really step up on peacekeeping. China does more on peacekeeping than any of the other P5 countries, and in fact including many other European countries. Secondly, he said, we are going to put voluntary contributions through the UN. Not lots, compared to some other countries, compared, say, to the US or the UK contribution. We are the second largest contributor after the US to the UN, if you take our voluntary contributions into account. But China said, we are going to put $1 billion over 10 years through the UN. That was a big statement. I think we should take China at its word, and we should look at that as an opportunity rather than as a threat.
Federico.
So I'll start by picking on the very last part of Sebastian's statement when he said that at the next G20, if Trump says America first, he would probably be alone. I disagree. I don't think he will be alone. I think we will see part of Europe taking sides with that kind of philosophy, of course not America first, but that kind of nationalistic and even protectionist approach. I will explain this, but first of all, a short background, historical background. When I established the La Repubblica China Bureau in Beijing in the year 2004, I remember distinctly that Italy was at the forefront of a protectionist assault attack against WTO rules, the opening of European markets especially in the trade of textile, apparel, shoes. So, further back, we in Italy invented Brexit and Trump long before you had all those.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much. We are not proud, but it's the truth. And I won't go as far back as to evoke Mussolini. But in the modern...
You don't need to.
I don't need it. But in terms of modern populism, at the beginning of the 90s, we had in Italy, the emergence of this Northern League, La Lega, which was first of all anti-immigrant, second, very, very near anti-Chinese, anti-globalization, protectionist. Somehow, although they were very, I would say very raw in their political expression, definitely not very refined, but they anticipated all the problems of rigged globalization destroying vast parts of the manufacturing industry in Italy, textile, apparel. So I remember this because today, if we want to understand the impact of Trump on the way that European public opinions see the China issue, we must be very careful. We have, the main narrative in Europe right now. You summarized it very well, Sebastian. The main narrative, if you read mainstream media, experts, most diplomats especially, they will tell you Trump will create a void. He will weaken transatlantic relations. So we might try to adjust our relations and use China as an alternative, as a counterbalance. This is the smart thing to do. So we had this kind of discourse, mainstream media, experts, diplomats, applauding Xi Jinping in Davos. Here is a great leader who is defending globalization under attack from Trump. Even applauding Xi Jinping as the new tenant, the new supporter of the Paris Agreement, the climate change agreements to fight climate change. This will increase the suspicion of public opinions who are already in favor of populistic movement. They will see governments, diplomats, experts, mainstream media conjuring, to support the kind of globalization that has inflicted so much damage to our industries, workers, especially in the weakest links of the European economy. I mean, Italy, Southern Europe, including France. Okay, and I think it's really delusional today to think that China can substitute the U.S. in a new kind of adjusted relationship. In Europe, long before Trump appeared here on the political scene. In Europe, there was already a rejection of trade liberalization, huge demonstrations against the TTIP, because Europeans thought that a new trade partnership with the United States would lower our standards in terms of labor rights, consumer protection, safety, health, and environment. Now, to think that we could find with China a new kind of agreement on trade and investment that would increase the labor rights, environmental protection, this is crazy. And it will, if we go that way, really we will increase the popularity of our own populistic movements in Italy, France, Marine Le Pen, etc.
It's very interesting. I recently had a 2.5-hour conversation with Peter Navarro, who's in the White House, the head of the National Trade Council, and he sounded very much like you just did.
Yeah.
And so what you're basically saying to us is that China, which the Communist Party came to power with the populist movement, it's sort of turned into the antichrist of popular movements, is now going to support globalization and the establishment, whereas Europe may be engendering these populist movements which are against it and more in accord with Trump.
Well, it makes perfect sense to me because I don't buy the neoliberal mantra that globalization is a win-win situation. There are winners, there are losers. China has been on the winning side for the last 25 years. So it's perfectly normal that China is in favor of this system, the way the WTO system is working, has been working. And many European countries, or inside the countries, parts of the populations are on the losing side. So they have a completely different approach to globalization.
So, Susan, how do you see this from the perspective of American policy?
Well, you know, when I served in the State Department, I would be dispatched from time to time to Europe to go around and talk about China and try to encourage a kind of common front in our efforts to bring China into the international system in non-proliferation regimes, arms control regimes, on the security side, the human rights side, as well as the economic side. And what I recall is that European foreign ministries have a lot of expertise on China, but that the objectives of Europe were always much narrower and more commercially focused than those of the United States, which is worried also all the time about these security issues, especially, as well as human rights. But now that the economic issues, trade and investment, are really so front and center in our relationships with China, of course we also still have a lot of security issues to worry about, including South China Sea, North Korea. But on the economic issues, if we didn't have a Trump presidency, I can imagine that we would all be finding common cause to try to push China to open up more domestically, because it's fine for Xi Jinping to say all these nice words at Davos, but the reality in China is that China's taken a U-turn back from decades of reform and opening to reform going nowhere, and the economy becoming more closed, discriminating against foreign firms in various ways, and making life difficult for foreign business. But now that we have a Trump administration, you know, I'm sorry, but I can't help think that it's not a bad thing for China to step up and try to defend the global trade system and open trade and global governance. I mean, we want somebody to be doing it. And I always feel that China is a work in progress. It's not, just the fact that it's now become more closed domestically doesn't mean that there aren't reformers, there isn't private business. There are a lot of interest groups in China who want China to get back on the path of reform and opening. So, I think it's potentially the silver lining in the whole Trump shock, if it kind of jolts China into seeing that there's an opportunity for Xi Jinping personally to achieve international respect, prestige by being this kind of global leader. And, maybe there will be a narrowing of China's position internationally and what it's doing domestically, because obviously right now there is, a contradiction between the defense of open trade and the way China is actually managing its economy domestically. So, I think it'll be really interesting to see how it goes. And if, I don't see this completely in the frame of geopolitical and commercial economic competition between the United States and China. I think that if this nudges China in a direction that is positive and means a more open economy inside China, that could be a very good thing. Also, certainly if the Trump administration is really going to spark a trade war or try to destroy these international institutions, I think there will be a kind of global panic about that if the United States is acting so irresponsibly. And if China together, arm in arm with Japan, is that a bad thing? I think that's a good thing. And together with European countries, Australia, whatever, it's time for folks to rally around it. If that enhances China's role in the world and respect for China, I don't think that's a bad thing.
Okay, so everybody seems to think that the Europe sort of Atlantic alliance is fraying a bit and China is on the march. You don't think it's a bad thing if we can socialize China a bit and get it in the system. But it wasn't so long ago that President Obama was saying we want TPP because if we don't make the rules, they will. Now, what do we think about these rules? Do we have any power to control whether China does take a larger role? It seems to me it goes without saying they're going to want to also write the rules and change the rules.
They were just meeting with the TPP countries. Has that already occurred? This week, I believe. The other countries who we've left high and dry by walking away from TPP were meeting in Kuala Lumpur or somewhere, I'm not sure where.
Yes, but these are just the countries. What I'm asking is,
and China went as an observer to that meeting. And I don't think it's totally impossible that something positive might come out of that. Now, I'm not naive. I'm not saying that China's going to meet the standards of TPP tomorrow just to gain international respect for Xi Jinping, but I do think that something positive might come out of that.
I mean, there's a more fundamental issue behind it, because there's a tendency among certain parts of the political public in most Western countries to kind of identify, characterize China as an adversary across the board.
Right.
And it's not, clearly. And that's the important stuff, I think. From a very sober position, it's clear that we need Chinese cooperation on certain issues, like climate, like public health. pandemia prevention, things like this. It's impossible to do without China. So that's the collaborative part, and we need it as a partner. It's possible to do. Also in certain businesses, there's a lot of potential that can be still used in doing business in China, clearly. The other thing is, and that's more problematic presently, and that's a kind of an area that's a gray zone in many ways, is China as a competitor, as a rival. Yeah? And this is something that comes to the fore presently in industrial policy and technological rivalry, and also these issues of investment screening in the US, in Europe also. These issues are clearly something where they don't, they are competitors, but the way they conduct this competition is not fair, is clearly kind of, it's a tilted playing field that they are establishing there, and we have to go against it. But still, compromises can be made in those areas, and this is the important stuff. So it would be a grave mistake, and I think it's being made by the Trump administration to a very large extent to frame China as an adversary, because you get it. You will receive China as an adversary in the end. It will become an adversary because it's pressed in a situation where it can't move around anymore. So presently we have I think it makes a lot of sense to differentiate these potentials, these roles that China performs in our diplomatic interactions. So it's really, I would stress the potential that is still there for collaboration, but at the same time we warn, also my institute warns consistently against this tilted playing field that they are establishing presently. And then, as an adversary, clearly we have severe issues in cyber espionage, in the law of the seas, and many other areas of legal international law, where it will be very difficult to find compromises at all. So clearly this is something where I see adversarial interactions probably getting stronger in the next few years. But still, I think it would make a lot of sense to differentiate these kind of different issue areas and then to deal with China on an issue-based manner.
Well, of course, I mean, China isn't just the U.S. trading with France or with Italy. I mean, it is a big country and a very different kind of a country.
Sure.
And we perhaps forget quickly we had a Cold War, and the Cold War was really about different ideologies, systems, and values. What do we do with that? Where has that gone? Does that matter? Or are we just in a transactional mode here with China, where the important thing is to trade, to have an equal sort of a partnership, include them economically in the world system, but the rest of it is really not that important?
I have a very short and very cynical answer. The rise of populism is devaluing our values. So it's becoming almost a non-issue. When you have, every month in Europe, new polls are testing the popularity of Mr. Vladimir Putin, and it's going up and up and up. When this is the mood, the issue of value is not as important as it used to be.
So you think, in a certain sense, the whole idea of sort of the liberal democratic world has lost its glow as a model, and
or at least its self-confidence. I mean, large parts of the populations in Western liberal democracies have so little trust and confidence in their own democratic system that they don't even dare oppose it as a valid and solid alternative to authoritarian regimes, which are seen often as more effective. Look at how China managed to avoid the worst consequences of the crisis in 2008, 2009. There has been a lot of revaluation of that kind of state capitalism, government, directed, planned capitalism. So I think in many of our countries, there is much less confidence in what we are.
So, Peter, you come from the land of the Magna Carta on dam. How would you say Great Britain is looking at this question of China and what it stands for, quite apart from the purely transactional questions of trade and economic well-being?
I mean, I think first and foremost, a classic British word is pragmatism. We are a very pragmatic nation. I think, secondly, what Sebastian was saying earlier about differentiating is important. In other words, when I look at China, I do not see a monolith. I see a lot of different people, different interest groups, as Susan was saying, basically fighting for their vision of what China's going to become. And I see opportunities for countries like ours, for countries like Italy, countries like Germany, to find ways that we can work with that. I also think that if you look at, and again, I'll bring it back to my world, the UN in New York, the kinds of issues that we're dealing with in the Security Council, if you're looking at the real destabilizers in the international system at the moment from where I sit, it ain't China, it's Russia. So I would hate to create an environment where we are, if you like, forcing China and Russia closer and closer together, while the rest of us are trying to advocate for a world that no longer exists. In other words, global leadership is more fragmented today than it was a decade ago, 2 decades ago. That's just a fact. The question is how you then deal with it. And what I'd like to do is deal with it issue by issue, pragmatically, so that we work with the people who are willing to work with us. It bothered me earlier this year, late last year, early this year, when China joined Russia in vetoing a resolution in the Security Council on serious chemicals weapons. That should not have happened. If we were in a slightly different environment where China was feeling a little bit more easy and relaxed about its role in the world, I don't think it would feel that it needed to do that with Russia. That is a problem for us. Equally, we have big issues on which we want to work with China, such as the DPRK, where I genuinely believe there is an opportunity for the US and China to forge a new kind of relationship which looks at what, for me, is the biggest single threat to international global peace and security. So I think we have to be open-minded, we have to look for opportunities to cooperate, but goodness gracious, we have to do that with our eyes wide open.
So do you all think...
Can I just jump in here for one sec
Okay.
before you say that? Because what Peter said really brought something home to me, which is that we've been talking about how Xi Jinping in China wants to build this positive international reputation by stepping forward to defend the global governance institutions. And meanwhile, Russia and Putin, it seems like Putin builds his prestige at home and in the world by spoiling things, by disrupting things. So that's a huge difference between Russia and China. And one of the big questions in the world today is whether or not China would start emulating Russia in the way it, took a more hard-edged, hostile stance to the West.
It's the destabilization agenda that Russia is pursuing that China hates, actually. That's where they openly say we are very different from that.
Right.
I mean, this is one of the basic differences that it would concede, actually.
Right,
And
which is a really important wedge
very
to
important.
keep there.
Very important.
And it really matters tremendously to the rest of the world. So therefore, if China now is, trying to pursue this other approach, which is to lead the open trading system and all these other international institutions, I think it is important that they feel that they have a way to do that.
So do you all think then that the sort of more transactional way that China deports itself in the world, going to Zimbabwe or Kazakhstan and saying, listen, we don't really care what your government's like, we don't care who you lock up, just let's do business, let's just get along. Are we entering that world?
We have a new world already. I think we never took it seriously so far, but there is systemic competition is back, actually. And Federico mentioned it all, that the people see China as kind of, many people in many countries see China at least as kind of an alternative order that is there, that is doing things in building physical infrastructure, providing jobs, these things, providing internal security, these really pressing problems that many countries have now, where China is seen as, and I never thought this to happen actually, never assumed that this would be possible, but when people see China as a model now, in many emerging and developing countries, this is seen as something that is take a different approach to managing modernization. So we have really an appeal. As you said, there is some kind of appeal for certain elements, certain features of the Chinese system, but it certainly doesn't apply to the Communist Party, it doesn't apply to free speech or as suppressed free speech, and it doesn't also apply to the kind of ideological rejuvenation, revitalization that is being tried presently by the Chinese Communist Party. So this is something where I tend to see in the near future kind of a new cleavage, a new really very big divide. If this trend towards a monistic ideology, if this trend is being strengthened over the next few years in China, we have kind of a new also confrontation, a new systemic competition, but it's more of confrontation between ideologies. And then I doubt whether the appeal of the Chinese system will still be so broad as today. It's still kind of in many ways people are responding from their stomach. Yeah? They don't like what is happening in their society, so they turn to any models they don't really know the details about, but they see this as an alternative option. This is what's happening presently. But this kind of contrast, they will be sharpened over the next few years by probably a further tightening in the Chinese system that many people expect, and then we are in a different context again. Then it will be sharper. The contrast will be worked out much sharper than they are today.
So what do you all think the world would look like if China continues to ascend, the U.S. to decline, Europe to disintegrate? What will the world order, what will our societies, what will our universities, our civil societies, our governments look like in such a world?
Just a few glimpses of my view. First of all, I'm very struck as an Italian, and so obviously I have to have some knowledge about the Roman Empire, that long before Donald Trump launched his plan about the $1 trillion investment in infrastructure, the One Road, One Belt plan by Xi Jinping is similar in its the size of the investments, but it's not inward, it's projected outward. And it resembles very much the strategy of the ancient Romans. You build an empire by building roads, bridges, water systems, and it's very appealing to your future colonies or, let's say, partners.
You give the Visigoths a nice road.
It is appealing, yes. But the limit I see here is in a world where cultural hegemony is so important, pop culture, Putin is much more modern than the Chinese. Putin was able to launch in all our countries a very simple thing, RT, Russian television, very effective. Very effective as a tool for propaganda or anyway. It's kind of, have you ever watched RT, Russian TV? It's
more effective than CCTV, which has now changed its name.
CCTV is boring. You can watch CCTV only if you really have a jet lag in a hotel and you need to sleep, then you watch CCTV. It's completely useless as a tool for cultural hegemony. Completely useless. I mean, the Russians are somehow more refined. But the other thing, just to close with a even more tragic view of the future, what the future. I think we will have small attempts at trade wars. Trade wars, I don't think trade wars happen all of a sudden. It's not like a nuclear war. You don't drop the atomic bomb. You try small things, and you can inflict a lot of damage on China before they can react and really do the same to you. When you are a very large market like the United States, very open, and have run for decades huge trade surpluses, this is an asymmetric system, and you can try an asymmetric war. And at the beginning, at least in the short, medium term, you can have the advantage. And I think that if this starts, Europe will split in two. You will see countries like Germany, which are objectively on the same side as China. You mentioned it. All the countries. No, I mean all the countries that have huge trade surpluses. Germany, Japan, South Korea. They have the same interests as China, but not France, not Italy. not Poland. So you will see really Europe further disintegrating and taking sides. Some European countries will believe that they have to defend the principles of WTO and stand with China. Other countries will stand with Donald Trump.
So the question is, if China's benefited so much from WTO, and Susan, you helped negotiate it, why do they want to change it? Why do they want to change the way the system is structured? Or
China?
Are they happy with it, and should we just let them have their way and not worry?
Wait, China
Yes.
wants to change? China doesn't really want to change
Well,
the
they're
WTO.
certainly setting up some alternative structures.
No,
There
they're
is some-
adding to it, but they don't
Well-
want to change the WTO. And in fact, what's striking about China's position on the World Trade Organization as well as other global governance institutions is they don't really have a vision of an alternative. They haven't tried to wreck those institutions in the past. What they've done is they've set up some additional initiatives. I see these more as economic diplomacy for China, like One Belt, One Road, the Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank, which is becoming more multilateralized. Actually, there's a big difference between those two institutions, with the AIIB being more like the Asian Development Bank and being more international and converging with global norms because it doesn't just involve China. One Belt, One Road may be welcomed by many countries who feel that, you know, this is China's largesse being shared for infrastructure construction. Who doesn't like that? But yet, it's striking to me how so many countries start feeling resentful of China, even after they've given all of these gifts. And I'm a little sympathetic to China in this respect because it seems, again, quite similar to the United States, which often behaves in its own eyes benevolently, but then other countries kind of don't like the way we do things and feel resentful of it. But I don't agree, Orville, that China wants to change the WTO. In fact, I'm sort of hoping they'll want to move forward with further WTO-related trade agreements and not just talk nice, empty words about it, but actually try to move things forward to a more open global system on services, on government procurement. I mean, certainly they have yet to sign on to the government procurement agreement. So there's unfinished business that China does have in deepening its commitment to that system, but not trying to change it.
You know, I have to say, just sitting and listening, with possible exception of you, Federico, I mean, this seems like a very benign world of China's rise. So before we get to you all, let me just go down the line here and say, what worries you about this ascendancy, if anything? Sebastian, let's start with you. Let's assume that China is on the march and the West is in decline. Are you worried?
There's a huge pull from China now. I think that's clear. It's becoming a huge market that is in a similar size of the U.S. soon, and it's something that, especially for manufacturers, for industrial producers, is irresistible. It's irreplaceable as a market already. So all those countries who are in that business, they can't get away from China. It's kind of a gravitational dilemma. Even if you do want to move away from it and keep a certain distance, you are pulled to it. And it's like, what is it, a tractor beam, is it, in Star Wars, right? Yeah, it's really something you can't. This is really a dilemma. So many people are worried that they are becoming over-dependent on China in economic terms and also in diplomatic terms, some countries. And they want to move away from it, but can't. And this is something that, in terms of diplomatic and international relations dynamics, is really worrisome. The other more scary issue clearly is that the Chinese system itself is changing presently. The domestic system is changing. So we don't know what it will look like in a few years. And it has hardened over the last few years. It's a hard, people would say, a hard authoritarianism now, really a very, in many ways, revived, strengthened Leninist system, even a digital Leninism that is emerging there based on IT technologies, surveillance technologies from the 21st century. This is something that is emerging, still emerging. And that's certainly, from the point of view of all our societies that we represent here, won't be accepted by the citizens in those societies. And this is something where conflict and actually friction won't be avoided. Yeah, this is something that you can't ignore, even if you have very profitable trade negotiations. So, for example, surveillance technologies. This is a dragnet already in the cyberspace in China, so no business operating in China will escape it. And I wonder how they manage this. Data protection, it's the integrity of their IT systems. All these things are now already on the agenda everywhere. And this is serious stuff. You don't invest in an economy where you can't be sure that your IT systems are protected. You know, this is something that's not possible. Also with Industry 4.0, networked industrial production, it's impossible if you don't trust the networks that you are working with. And this is important stuff for the future, also in terms of investment, not just political issues and political rights. So there are many factors that are, in the medium term, are moving towards a much more skeptical position vis-à-vis China. And we haven't talked about the potential for economic disruptions in China so far. This is also something that may, again, change the entire playing field for us if something serious happens in the financial system in China, an open financial crisis, which is possible. There are many factors in place already. What are we doing? What's our response? It will lose attractiveness overnight, maybe.
Right.
Yeah?
That's right.
Susan, what are your worries?
Well, I agree with Sebastian that there are a lot of unpredictable things that could happen in China domestically. But internationally, look at how China is treating South Korea now. Look at how it treated the Philippines. Look at how it uses its market power to achieve some of these very narrow kind of symbolic issues. And I'm putting THAAD in that category.
South Koreans.
You know, and it's so primitive and pretty obnoxious, really, and alienates other countries. So there's a natural resistance or balancing or counter coalition among the 20 countries in Asia, certainly. If China gets too strong and the United States abdicates, then, you know, they will want to push back. The question is, will they have the courage to do that without the United States being a more stable presence in the region? I think that is a big question mark and a very worrisome possibility if the U.S. kind of withdraws from Asia, in effect.
There's one saying in the European Union that's based on experience: never face China alone. Never face China alone.
Maybe that's where our title came from.
Right,
Sebastian.
maybe, yeah, right.
But I mean,
But that
even
also applies to the U.S. probably. Yeah, if you want to transform the international trade system, you have to do it in collaboration with others. Clearly, yeah.
Well, I have a lot of worries, and mainly I would say I would develop what Sebastian said in a more general way. I would say we lived for a long time, and when I say we, especially progressive political forces in the West, intellectuals, we lived under the assumption that by adopting our economic system, capitalism, China would sooner or later become more democratic. This was almost a Marxistic approach, deterministic approach. The economy will determine the rest, the superstructure, the political system. It didn't happen. On the contrary, we are seeing that history can walk backwards. It does happen, and China, on most political issues has gone backwards. I would add that after that assumption collapsed, that by being capitalist they would become democratic, there was the other illusion in the West. I would say this is the religion of the Silicon Valley. It's, I call it technological fetishism. The idea that because there is the internet, all this circulation of information, this was true. Bill Gates said it so many times, that by being more connected to the rest of the world through the internet, they would become more similar to us. Untrue. The internet has been renationalized. It's becoming, in many countries, China, Russia, an intranet with the famous firewalls, etc. So this is another assumption that has collapsed under our eyes. I don't see any reason to be optimistic. I would add one detail, which is not really a small detail. Among the things that we value here is a multi-ethnic, diverse society. China is one of the most mono-ethnic, racist societies I've known.
Full stop.
Yeah, enough. Enough said.
Peter.
So I think for me, the key worries would first of all be about openness. That if we're going to grow our relationships with China, then that must be on the basis of openness, not on the basis of a closed system. And that means honest and frank dialogue. If the price for cooperating with China is that has to go, then that's not going to work for us, and it's not going to work for China either. I think my second worry would actually be going back to what you've just been talking about. Nationalism bothers me. It bothers me everywhere. But it bothers me no less in China than it bothers me in other places, because the stakes are very high and because China is an increasingly powerful country. But it's also a country that still does not have an open debate about its own history, and that makes it far more difficult to have an open debate with its neighbours. I think the third thing that worries me is in cooperating with China, and I do believe that we should. I believe it's in our interests. In doing so, we always used to think about how that cooperation would change China. I think we need to think very carefully now about how that cooperation might change us. So I think in all of these things, it is essential that we are both open but also true to our own values. And that, for me, is absolutely fundamental.
Well, there's a lot to chew on here, but let's maybe open it up to you all for questions. So I would ask you to wait for the microphone, tell us who you are, and if I may, beg you to be brief. That way we'll get more questions. And let's start right in the front, and then we'll go to the woman in the back.
This is a terrific discussion, and I agree with so much of what has been said.
Who are you?
Jerry Cohen, NYU Law School. I'm wondering about the level of knowledge, the quality of the media, the reporting in Europe about China. When I hear people are taking seriously the very nice speech that Xi Jinping made in Davos, does it mean they're ignorant of what you pointed out about the reality of business treatment in China? Does it mean they don't know about the suppression of human rights that you've alluded to, Sebastian, a number of times, and others have? Does it mean they don't know about the internal difficulties confronting Xi Jinping, which is why he's increasingly repressive, and the internal weaknesses that China potentially has that Susan has alluded to? Is there a lack of sophistication in the media, or does it represent a simple lack of interest? We used to look to Europe for protesting human rights violations in China. We hear less of it now. I'm just wondering, is this a level of knowledge problem, a loss of interest, different values, perceptions? What's going on here? People can't be that ignorant.
So who would like to try that? Sebastian?
Davos was clearly one of the best it was the best speech that I've ever heard from a general secretary for a Western public, and this is a select public in Davos. These are people who wanted to hear exactly what he had to say. He promised them that China would be the guarantor of the international open trading system. And this is exactly what they wanted to hear. It was an emotional thing also because there was lots of really bad news there. So they were kind of overwhelmed by all these populist movements and social issues and environmental and health issues. There were lots of discussions that were really giving you a dark vision of the world. And then Xi Jinping came and gave this kind of, really, the promise, inspirational speech. And it was quoting Western literature. It was not for the Chinese public. Really a refined speech in many ways. Really, what he metaphors from Western history and so not from Chinese. That was really a superb speech in terms of calibration to the Western publics that he had to face. So this was the image making was perfect, I think. They have made big progress on that. And the other thing is that there's really, among the elites at least, there's as I think Federico is right there, among the elites there's a fear that this open economy, this global economy is on the verge of collapsing now, because it's major players are withdrawing their support. And so this is something that played together well. He was kind of a savior style that he was presenting himself there. So I would see it as, knowledge is good, actually, I must say, in terms of businesses, certainly. And in terms also of public debate in the media, I'd say that China is really presented in a very nuanced way now. Not just black or white, it's really different aspects that are coming there in the media. So I think this is not the problem.
Well, I partially disagree. I think that you raised a real issue, because if China keeps denying visas to Western journalists, as it's been happening, I think that we will run out of news from China, reliable, in-depth coverage. I think we already sense something is deteriorating in the quality and the amount of news we have. When you see that the New York Times has had several correspondents with the visas denied, they had to switch part of their, let's say, their manpower from Beijing, Shanghai to Hong Kong, which is still relatively free zone in terms of freedom of information. But you don't cover well China from Hong Kong. So I think there is a problem there.
Well, my answer is I don't think we are nearly expert enough. I mean, I think Sebastian is an exception rather than a rule. I think you see more expertise on China on one street in Washington than you do in huge swathes of Europe. So my feeling about this is we're not doing nearly enough. I do think we are going from we're moving from a point way behind the United States, and I think this is something sometimes some of my American friends forget when they get cross with us for not standing up for this or for not doing that. We are coming from way behind. China is a far more deep part of your economy, and frankly a deeper part of your society than it is for us. That for me is a problem for Europeans. I think we need more of it. We need more engagement, but we also need more expertise, and we need to do this with our eyes open. So I think we've got a lot of work to do.
So the woman right down here, yes, please.
Hi there. Is it on?
Yep.
So my name is Milka Santana, and I work at JP Morgan. I actually had a comment first about the gentleman saying that China is one of the most racist countries in the world. I couldn't disagree more. I lived in China for 6 years. And got treated amazingly as a dark-skinned woman. What China is a lot more honest than, for example, the United States. So I'm not saying that some people in China are not racist. I'm saying that it is equally racist as the United States. It's just that they are more open about expressing their racism than the United States is, because they don't have that filter that a lot of Americans have. That's my point. My question is, if China does become this globalization leader, what is the impact to the rest of the world? By the rest of the world, I mean Latin America and Africa.
Yeah, we're used to thinking of globalization as being sort of coterminous with liberal democratic institutions and values. But what if we have a new kind of sort of Leninist globalization?
You need a communist party for that.
Well, we have one.
One. but not in other countries. So China as a model is really based on an organizational core that is represented by a Communist Party with a very distinctive historical experience also, very different from the Soviet experience. This is really important. So this is certainly not to be emulated by other countries. It's impossible. There's no organizational foundation for emulating China, even if you want to do it. Yeah? So this is something that's important in terms of organization, but also in terms of, I'm dealing with that extensively in the book. The policy process itself in China is interesting. They still have this planning capacity, but they changed it from the traditional socialist way of resource allocation to a much more guidance and market incentive-driven thing now. This is something. The other thing is the experimentation that China is experimenting with policies still. In many, it's gone down in recent years, but they are still flexible to an extent sometimes that's really absolutely surprising if you compare them with Eastern European countries, socialist countries that have failed. All of them have failed in the
So
past.
let me just interrupt you, Sebastian. If, in fact, should we then not be worried about the sort of elevated propaganda and the intrusions that we see more and more of in our own societies, both in terms of Confucius institutes, people being disappeared, news outlets, all of these things. Is this a relatively benign form of, if we don't have a Communist Party, do we have no cause for worry or concern?
It's not very effective, but you can correct me, but I think this is really something. Confucius Institutes, there's lots of discussion about it, also in our countries, clearly they are everywhere, but they are very ineffective as kind of as vehicles of Chinese culture, and it's even more so as vehicles of Chinese politicians, politics, Chinese political goals. I don't see really a huge effect. They are failing.
So you don't worry about this forward sort of soft power propaganda, the billions of dollars being spent. It's epiphenomenal to our societies?
I think this is certainly one of the major failures of Chinese foreign policy that is very successful in many other ways, very successful, very consistent, very forward-thinking, long-term thinking. I really see that they have many strengths, but soft power is really their weak spot.
They've thrown a lot of money behind it, but you heard what was said about CCTV, and I don't think those inserts from China Daily really win a lot of hearts and minds.
They just support the New York Times.
Yeah, well, that's good.
One small exception regarding, I completely agree with you on the ineffectiveness also of the Confucius Institute. One small exception is as their ability to put pressure on local Chinese communities.
Yeah.
They intimidate any voice of dissent.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And we should expect that China should allow the United States to have similar, George Washington or Thomas Jefferson institutes, and that there's no reason that the United States should welcome Chinese organizations to freely establish here, but that we have absolutely, no opportunity to do the same in China. And I think that's something that should be raised by the government for sure. But it's interesting that Donald Trump has had. You don't hear a word about human rights from the Trump administration. It's as if, and maybe that's the reflection of the kind of populism that you were talking about.
I was just thinking that your remark, I agree with you on the possibility to open George Washington institutes. You can say the same to Pope Francis. He would completely agree with you about the freedom of opening churches that are not controlled by the Chinese government.
Right.
I wouldn't hold my breath, however.
No.
Okay, next question. Right on the edge in the end here, black sweater.
Hi, my name is Clay Carroll. It's been a great panel. You don't have any...
Tell us who you are, Clay.
Clay. I'm a former investment banker who lived in Asia for 13 years. We talk a lot about... you were talking a lot about the problems of globalization. Clearly, China is a status quo power. They want to keep this globalization going. Are they perhaps worried about these risks, and how are they going to react? Now, you say they want to be the leader, and they made a nice speech, but obviously to be a leader, there probably has to be some compromise. So, unfortunately, there's no one from China on the stage. I'm sure you invited them. So what compromises would they or could they be willing to make? So, for instance, foreign companies have been disadvantaged on shore, some of the trade things, the surpluses. Or, going back to the tractor beam concept, do they feel like we are the 100-pound gorilla in the room, and this is our strategy, and it's working, the West is fraying, we're going to stick to the course? So where is there compromise that they would be willing to make to keep the system going? Because the system, I think, you're all agreeing, kind of benefits them at the moment.
Well, I think in terms of China's own domestic policy, I think that Xi Jinping is ready to deal. I think he's really worried about a Trump-initiated trade war. It would be very costly to the United States, even though you think that maybe, China would be harmed by the loss of these exports. And the one thing that should be possible is to make some adjustments in their own domestic regulation of foreign businesses, open up a bilateral investment treaty with the United States, open up sectors that haven't been opened up before. So, especially in services, which will be a big growth area. So, I think he's ready to do a deal with Trump to a certain extent in ways. But, of course, what they will try to do first is send a big purchasing team over to the United States to buy things without making any real systemic changes. And that's not the way to go. We should not accept that as the solution. What we need is some real systemic changes so that all of these companies are competing on a level playing field.
I think that one thing is for Xi Jinping to be able to deliver a big agreement with a fantastic title. Another thing is to be able to deliver on the daily life of businesses inside China. Until you don't have a real rule of law, transparent judicial. I've been reading every year the reports of our European Union Chamber of Commerce, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. What they complain is very often petty kind of obstacles by the local administration, the local tribunal, so that every step in their daily life is more difficult than what it is for the Chinese competitor. This is not necessarily something that Xi Jinping can deliver with a huge kind of trade agreement.
But I think things are much worse than they were 10 or 15 years ago. And local officials, a lot of times, they want the foreign businesses there. So the foreign businesses have allies, too, on a local level. So I really think if the message comes through from Beijing and there are changes in the regulatory structure, obviously we would like to have a stronger legal system, but for the whole first period of China's reform and opening, you didn't really have much of a legal system, and yet companies really felt that they were welcome in China and that they could compete.
And of course, now you see this sort of this sense of not being welcome being elaborated out to civil society as well, making it so difficult that most small organizations will never manage the registration and the reporting procedures. Okay.
Orville, if I could just come in briefly on that. I do think one danger in all of this is that that there can be a temptation of leaders, especially leaders of very large countries, to think that if they sit in a room together and do a deal, that is somehow going to work. I think what we're talking here is about systems and building systems that work more broadly for society. And I think that matters as much for Chinese society, where if you look at the most successful business in China. They are not the big state-run enterprises. They're the private enterprises that are not so dependent on the state, on the state. And if you look for the United States, you look again at the whole panoply of businesses that want to cooperate more broadly around the world. So what you want is something that builds systemic cooperation that is a level playing field and free for all. And the United States traditionally has had a very, very important role to play in building that kind of international system. I think it would be a great shame if either side moved away from that now.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question. Let's take gentleman right here.
Well, first of all, I want to say this is an absolutely amazing panel discussion because it cuts across academics, politics, economics, you name it. And you know, the beginning of the conversation, I think that Sebastian started with the notion that there is some sense of predictability, reliability, stability that different partners, whether they're nations or corporations, find in China. So I have not found that. I have found the stability and reliability to be across the board a uniformly deceitful, manipulative, one-sided business relationship. So I am both an academic. I'm an oncologist by training, and I teach at Harvard and MIT in healthcare policy, which somewhat touches on some of the issues here, and entrepreneurship. And I left medicine to start an investment fund, which fortunately has been growing. And the fund focuses in on biotechnology and oncology. And there is a lot of business that I've done in China. So I speak from both an academic perspective with the hope that there, in any partnership, is a fair and level playing field. And my strong business side, the fund is about $2 billion. We have 27 companies in it. There is a tremendous lack of equilibrium between China and any partner. More than that, the notion that there are rules that China will abide by is, in my personal experience, completely fictitious. And I can speak to some very specific examples where there were companies that were making drugs for HIV/AIDS patients, and they were not in any way, shape, or form conforming with international standards in terms of toxic waste. And they would dump that waste and create green slime pools in their backyard. And the Chinese government, after many, many years of profiting from this, because they were venture partners in every single venture, decided to pick on one or two people, publicly humiliate them, often imprison them, sometimes kill them. And this sparked, a mass exodus of the entrepreneurs that were in the healthcare field. So what did they do? They ended up selling their companies to India. At the end of the day, my fear is that what is going to be happening is that in the short term, and I think Federico talked about some of the historical changes that his country and other great civilizations have seen. In the short term, demagogues always do great, because if they have popular support, they're going to push their agenda forward and rally around the flag. But that opens what I fear is a China gambit. I'm a bit of a chess player. And this China gambit rests on driving a partner who we expect to play by the rules into the corner, as I think Federico and some others were saying, and I think Sebastian as well, into the corner of the Russians, who clearly don't play by anybody's rules. And I think the gambit is that...
Listen, you've said so many interesting things here, and I think it's actually a very good sort of a little précis of your experience for us to end on.
Just one quick
okay,
point.
Quickly.
The gambit is that China owns more than 20% of the U.S. debt, and they peg their currency to our dollar. That is unfortunately the atomic bomb that may potentially be launched. So my question very simply is, how can you, as a panel, convince the administration that they are playing right into China's hands?
You know, if I may just start before
2.5 hours.
we'll
We talk about it all the time.
as I said, I think at the outset, I did spend some time with this new head of the new Trade Council in Washington, Peter Navarro, and he kept saying to me, and it's not an easy question to answer, he said, what have we ever gotten from China for all of our willingness to engage? Well, that may be a good question for us to end on.
We got a lot.
Yeah, but I'm not saying we didn't, but I'm saying let's answer.
I mean, now let's defend the Chinese position. The position is so: Western investors have been privileged for 25 years at least, and now they are complaining that China is trying to kind of protect Chinese or just defend the interests of Chinese companies to compete, to be able to compete with Western companies. So really, I mean, this story from the health sector and also from investment industries clearly is a tilted playing field. This is a completely, really a market that is distorted by any means. I completely agree. But in manufacturing, it's a different story. In manufacturing, there's real potential. There was a real build-up in infrastructure also, and companies made huge profits over decades in China. And they were privileged, tax privileges, they had really good access to government. And this is something that where I share the Chinese position to a certain extent, that those who complain the loudest now, the well-organized manufacturing companies, they have benefited the most over the last few decades. And this is something that we also have to be aware of. I mean, China was a market where investors were heavily privileged in many ways. For quite some time, this has changed recently, and so everybody's disappointed now. But we got a lot. I mean, huge. There are hundreds, for Germany, to be very concrete, hundreds of thousands of jobs in Germany, were created and are dependent today on the Chinese market. And this is something that's really, this kind of dependency is clearly going too far now from the political point of view. It's risky, but still there are many companies, even though the business environment has changed recently, there are still many companies, and I'm really skeptical about that, but I know many of them, they make tons of money still in a competitive and distorted environment. So this is something we got a lot, not in every branch of the economy, but there are from the long term, those who have been in China for a longer term, especially in manufacturing, they have benefited tremendously from their presence there.
One for you, two for me, that's China.
Mm-hmm.
So they're the second biggest economy now in the world.
Well,
Sure.
In 2 years, they'll be the biggest. And then
It's not a zero-sum game, clearly.
yes.
Yeah, both sides won. Yeah, sure.
Both sides won. And on the security side, we have a peaceful, stable Asia. We have China signed on to every arms control agreement, going from being a proliferator of missile and nuclear technology to part of the system working. You know, China is not a proliferator anymore. It's a defender of the global governance institutions in arms control and non-proliferation. And that's a great gain for the world. So, and then we have, China is open, the individual freedom in China. I mean, we're all very unhappy with the general direction of the current administration in China, and it's all about strengthening the Leninist features of Communist Party rule. I personally am really worried about, after the 19th Party Congress, you know, we'll have really a much more dictatorial Communist Party rule. But on the other hand, for all of those people in China, they have the freedom to travel abroad, to come to the U.S. and study. We've certainly benefited from Chinese immigration. That wouldn't have happened without reform and opening. So there's, you know, lots of, the U.S. has benefited tremendously by helping sponsor China's emergence since Deng Xiaoping era, for sure.
I mean, I think in Peter Navarro's defense, he was talking more about trade and investment than the overall benefits of engagement. But
on that,
Federico.
yeah. Well, I think that we cannot understand really what is happening inside our countries in terms of the political mood if we continue to talk about trade, international trade, as if it were trade between nations.
Right.
Stop. No, we cannot ignore the distributive effects inside our countries. So the answer to Navarro's question, what did we get from China? Well, the answer is very different if you are the chief executive of Apple. You got a lot from China. Or if you are a big shareholder of General Motors, because General Motors is selling a lot of cars in China, but they are manufactured in China. So it's good for the balance sheet of General Motors, not for the workers of General Motors in Detroit. They have lost a lot from Chinese competition. So this is what you really have to look at. And the other thing, just a quick remark on the atomic bomb, the idea that the retaliation from China in case of a trade war would be devastating by stopping to invest in treasury bonds, in U.S. treasury bonds, is a myth. China has, as any country that has a huge trade surplus, they must invest that surplus into something. There's nothing else you can buy. You don't want to buy euros. Yeah, I mean, you have to buy. No, I mean, this is a rule. This is imperial rule. The dollar being the money, the currency of the largest country in the world, the most powerful economy. It's the most liquid financial market in the world. You don't really have an alternative. You must invest your surplus mainly into treasury bonds. So this is a myth. They would inflict the damage upon themselves.
I think for me, there's no Chinese member of this panel, but if I was trying to think about this from a Chinese point of view, I would think about the 500 million people in China who, as a result of reform and opening up, have basically been lifted out of poverty. And I would be asking myself as a Chinese leader how I would be able to maintain that speed of growth. I think China will have a major problem if it is not able to continue to grow the pie, and if the debate in China becomes more about who gets a bigger share of the pie. I think that could be very, very dangerous for China. I think for the rest of us, we therefore have a very big interest in China beginning to take a greater share of responsibility for maintaining that open global trading system. And as you were saying, properly playing by the rules. If it doesn't, I think we will see other countries seeking to cut themselves off. And I think more importantly, we will see businesses and individuals seeking to cut themselves off from what they see as a dangerous and unpredictable environment. But for the vast majority of people in China, reform and opening up has delivered enormously for them, and for our countries it's delivered enormously from us. It's given Orville a cheap iPhone, it's given me cheap white goods, it's given a lot of our poorer people better access to cheap commodities, and that again is in our interests. So I strongly believe that China has a very, very big vested interest in the current system. What I'm not yet seeing is much beyond the very, very carefully, and I agree it was very carefully crafted speech by Xi Jinping at Davos, and I think that's the big test for China, and it's, in a way it's not fair for me to put China in this position, but the big test for China is how much is it able, prepared and willing to back the system that has actually been so good for it and so good for us.
Okay.
Very good. Now, you will find outside this lovely book by Herr Heilmann, and we hope you will pick a copy up and join me in thanking our four panels tonight.